Okay. It's Tony Berzinas, is that?
Yeah.
He took off. He took off, right?
He had to leave.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. All right. I have no more other cards for folks on this issue. We have a motion on the table, right?
Well, I understand.
Okay. Let's see if we can get a recitation of the motion. Mr. Siegel.
Oh, God. The motion is for staff to prepare an amendment to these
DP
to the
Delta's Place Policy 1 and the appendices discussions of various things.
to modify the description of the legacy towns that are referenced in that policy.
Okay. Mr. Ray, is that what your notes reflect?
Again, I think what we would be trying to do is identify two types of communities in addition to the urban and urbanizing ones. And one would be for the communities that are outside the primary zone of the Delta, the communities that are described in the maps that are included in Appendix K, and then for communities that are inside the Delta's primary zone, those would be areas that are designated for development in compliance with the Delta Protection Act. And we'll consult with the Protection Commission staff to identify exactly what those maps would look like. We'll have those by the time we come back to the council with the plan.
Okay. That's a motion before us. Don, you had a question?
Yeah, just so you suggested some language, though, too. Dan, you'll come back to us with that once you look at the maps and make sure that language fits the description. You outlined kind of breaking the communities that are... Okay, so you'll come back to us with that then.
Okay. All right. So we have a motion. We have a second, starting with Ms. Gray.
Fiorini, aye.
Eisenberg, aye.
Tully, aye.
Okay, we've got 4 on that. Mr. Johnston's around somewhere, and when he comes back, we'll reopen the roll for him, purpose of him adding on to that, if somebody were to remind me when it happens.
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank our staff and certainly Contra Costa staff and all the folks that work and the people from Bethel Island, residents and historians for their work on this. So.
Okay, thank you. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Supervisor People, too.
Yeah, we appreciate the postponement so that we could have these last couple of weeks to work on it. Thank you very much.
Okay, good. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Ray, I believe we're down to our final and last issue, which is item number 11 on the agenda item, the council action item, and then we have, of course, the consent issues to go through. So let's go to number 11, prioritizing state investments, Delta levies risk reduction. Let's do a summary again of your recommendation.
Okay, thank you. Yes, this is a key policy, but not certainly the only key policy of the risk reduction chapter. That features a multi-pronged strategy to improve safety and reduce risk from flooding and other disasters in the Delta, boosting emergency response, proposing a local district who can assess the folks that are protected by levees, including public agencies and utilities, to help provide additional local resources to improve levees. And then it also identifies 4 different kinds in the narrative, 4 different kinds of widely used standards for levees in the Delta, HMP being the one that allows people to get reimbursed from FEMA for disasters, and then PL 8499 allows them to get reimbursed by the Corps, 2 sources of money, and then up for urban levies from that. The plan nowhere endorses any particular standard for any particular location, and on page 270 of the plan, it encourages improvements beyond those the state can finance using local resources. But it does also then suggest ways to prioritize state investments in Delta levees, and lays out a methodology that we've discussed many times here for how that we would go about developing a plan proposals that prioritize state investments in levees. And then it also then indicates what priorities should be in the interim until that longer-term set of priorities can be developed. It suggests now we're proposing to you that those interim priorities would fall into 3 different categories: localized flood protection, improvement of the levee network, and then ecosystem restoration. and it identifies 3 goals in each category. And what the policy provides is that any improvements above the HMP level, which is, again, the level that allows people to be assured they'll get reimbursed for flood disaster costs by FEMA, or by FEMA, that improvements beyond that level could be approved if there's benefits that are provided that justify the additional improvements. Now, DWR would be the agency that would be certifying folks' consistency with this policy, because it really, again, is a policy about funding priorities, and they're the ones that are making funding decisions. So we've tried to include language that indicates that they would need to take a balanced approach over time to pursue these priorities. There's a variety of ways that they could demonstrate that. They could show how their overall budget pursued those priorities. They could show how their cost share allocations pursue those priorities. They could indicate that they've got targeted solicitations that focus on a particular priority, and that the overall outcome was consistent with those priorities. You know, some projects have got mixes of funds. You've got individual communities, for example, that might have a project levy on one side of the island and a non-project levy on the other side of the island. And so we need to be anticipating that as well. Then finally, we've added a narrative that would acknowledge the Delta Protection Commission's Economic Sustainability Plan recommends that the PL 8499 is the appropriate standard to provide for the economic sustainability in the Delta. So I believe that with those revisions, we have a policy that meets the concerns of the stakeholders with whom we've spoken, and that's what we're recommending you adopt.
Don.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Dan and Joe and our staff, and certainly all the folks that came together earlier in the week and have been commenting on this. We'll hear from folks, but I think this, again, reflects a good deal of thought, and certainly recognizes certainly council direction in previous conversations. But again, there's a good time devoted, a good deal of time devoted earlier this week and prior to that and after that, trying to, I think, capture the competing priorities, but certainly also the reflection of what the levies mean not only to risk reduction, but to protection of life and property, but also to the long-term viability of pursuits in the Delta, as well as those that are served by other, whether it's water transfer or ecosystem restoration, keeping with the co-equal goals. So I want to just thank our staff for their work, and certainly all the folks that came together from the reclamation districts, the engineering background, as well as I know Gail Newton from Department of Water Resources was very helpful in her conversations. Jay Pino from the board was there as well, and again, it was a good meeting. So thank you, Joe, for your work and that of your staff, and Dan particularly for your efforts as well. So.
Without deliberately trying to disrupt things, can I ask a couple questions? Looking at the red line staff recommendation revisions of the attachment to the council action item, and in particular on Delta levy funding, will somebody please tell me what this sentence means? The goals for funding priorities are all important, and it is expected that over time DWR must balance these goals.
It's achievement of the goals. Yep.
I mean, it must mean something, but it is not clear to me what it means.
Well, I think we want to acknowledge that, yeah, it is important not just to protect existing urban and adjacent urbanizing areas at 200-year level of protection. It is also important to protect agricultural and local working landscapes. We're not trying to say that one of these issues is necessarily more important than the other. There was concern expressed by stakeholders that, for example, we might be providing instruction that said we want you to fully fund all the urban and adjacent urbanizing areas that need 200-year flood protection before you fund any protection for small communities or any protection for local agriculture and working landscapes. Right. And so we're trying to indicate that, all of these priorities are important, and that DWR needs, as it makes funding decisions over the next couple of years, and again, these are priorities that would apply in the next couple of years, that they need to have a balanced approach as they approve these goals, that any one solicitation may not be fully compliant with each of these priorities because they will do multiple solicitations and they have many fund sources through which dollars are distributed. So they would need to be able to explain how the entire package pursues these goals.
So, for example,
That one sentence encompasses all of that meaning?
that's
If
the
it
intent.
does, it's beyond me. I mean, I understand I think I understand the politics of this, but I don't know what it says. That's one. Then number 2, except on islands planned for ecosystem restoration, improvement of non-project delta levees to the HMP standard may be funded without justification of the benefits. Now, I've been told that is current Department of Water Resources practice, maybe even policy. But they're thinking of changing it, right? Am I wrong?
My understanding is their current practice is that they will, and I believe Eric Nichols here, and you might be able to fill me in a little more.
Well, and
But my understanding is that in terms of the applications that they receive, folks don't need to provide a justification in terms of the assets that are being protected to justify
For any non-project levy anywhere in the statutory delta or Suisun Marsh, as long as the goal, as long as the action gets them to HMP standards.
Most of Suisun Marsh is not covered by the Delta Levies program, only a small portion.
I understand that. That's
Yeah.
why I ask it, because this makes no such distinction, and it applies to our boundaries in the Delta Plan, which would include the Suisun Marsh.
Yeah, there are no state funding programs available to improve levees that are not part of the Delta Levies program, so that I'm not sure.
So this sentence doesn't mean that we're saying any non-project levy anywhere in the Delta and the Suisun Marsh is entitled to be funded by the state for HMP standards, or are we?
Well, and at risk of making it more complex, there are the unattributed levies that we talked about the other day. So non-project levies is specific in referring to a certain kind of levy that typically occurs only in the Delta and a small portion of the Suisun Marsh. So in this case, it actually is saying for the non-project levies, yes, going up to HMP is the state objective. It does not include most of the levies in the Suisun Marsh because they are not designated non-project levies. I'm sorry, it's complex.
Well, I know it's complex, but I don't understand what you've just said.
Okay.
And I clearly don't understand what you've written.
What we've said is that, yes, upgrading all of the non-project levies in the Delta should be a priority and is
For discretionary state funding.
amongst yes, for discretionary state funding. Yes.
Does that appear anywhere in the language?
I guess that was the intent of the language.
Yeah, that would be.
Uncodified legislative intent,
except for
unwritten
islands that are
legislative
for-
intent.
It's under the localized flood protection. The third goal is protect agriculture and local working landscapes.
Well, you mentioned the Delta Levy Subventions Program, which is a specific program in the first sentence. I mean, look,
As always, you want us to be clearer so that someone who's not an expert.
let me go to the last sentence of it. Improvements to a standard above HMP, such as Public Law 8499, may be funded as befits the benefits to be provided, consistent with DWR's current practices and any future adopted investment strategy.
So,
Now, is this improvements to a standard of any levy anywhere in the Delta and the Suisun Marsh? And is it, I think this is designed to, as I understand the current DWR practice using discretionary funds, they require a showing of some uniqueness before non-project levies outside state obligation areas are funded. This would have the effect of saying they don't have to make any showing.
no, it has the effect of saying they do have to make the showing consistent with current practice, which is that if you're going to upgrade to PL 8499, you must demonstrate that there are benefits that justify the upgrade beyond HMP. So we're saying, in terms of reducing risk for the state bringing levies, non-project levies, which protect the agricultural islands up to H&P is the minimum standard. That's consistent with what we've said all along. We're saying if you want to go above that, then you need to demonstrate that the benefits
Justify the investment.
justify the investment. And that is consistent with current state practice. And there is a draft policy, investment strategy that DWR has produced that would codify that further. And we're saying so consistent with current state practice and the future investment policy, which will go through their regulatory process in the next few months. And in fact, given our schedule, they may be, in the end, ahead of us. So given that, this allows that process to continue to move forward, but it does require that they have to justify upgrades beyond H&P,
Okay.
which is consistent with where the council has been.
Okay.